Now I get to be Santa Claus.
Merry Christmas.
Hello everybody, I am legally the new Santa Claus. Christmas is just around the corner, so you know what that means. It's time to watch Christmas movies! Yay! I guess you could technically watch Christmas movies any time of the year, but that would be insane to do. One of my favorite Christmas movies is The Santa Claus, featuring Tim Allen. It is a 90s classic. It's a little bit cheesy, but it still makes me laugh. If you don't know, the main plot of The Santa Claus, featuring Tim Allen, is that an ordinary man named Scott Calvin, who has basically the same personality as Tim Allen, accidentally kills Santa, who falls off of his roof, and there's a clause that if you kill Santa and put on the Santa Claus suit, you become the new Santa. It's a funny premise and has taught many children that sometimes crime does pay. Well, that movie was made 28 years ago, and they made 2 sequels since. The Santa Claus 2, which was a little bit worse than the first one, and then they made the Santa Claus 3, which was a little worse than the second one. So, when Disney Plus announced that they were releasing a new The Santa Claus series, a 6-episode show featuring Tim Allen, I was skeptical. If the first sequel movie was bad, and then the second sequel movie was even worse, I wonder if a sequel series would be bad too.
It could be the end of Christmas.
The trajectory was not looking good. That is why I decided to make this video. I needed to find out whether this series would tarnish the Santa Claus name further, or if it would show the true meaning of Christmas. And by the true meaning of Christmas, I mean accidentally kill Santa.
Goodbye.
I watched the entire series as it was coming out, and to be honest, I had no idea what to expect. I have a lot of comments on the weirdness and quirkiness of the show, so let's just get started with the first episode. So the first episode starts on Christmas Eve. We are quickly introduced to a new family. You have the father, Simon Chosky, and his daughter, Grace. The mother had died, so Simon is a single father. Now we see Simon in a meeting with employees, and we quickly find out that Simon is a tech whiz. Currently, Simon owns an e-commerce store called Everything Now, but the business is not going very well because their delivery system sucks.
Listen, if our delivery system was working, we wouldn't have to. So who can tell me what our Christmas market share is?
6%?
Oof. What's that 17% that says other?
We don't know.
So apparently Santa Claus ships like 17% of the world's stuff during Christmas time, which is a big share. But what I do love about this is that even Amazon is dominating over Santa Claus during Christmas time. Not even a magical elf man can defeat the corporate monster of Amazon. Jeff Bezos controls all.
Marauders.
Oh, it looks like Santa Claus made a visit. Simon hides his daughter in his bunker because he's scared of
Marauders.
But they go out a little bit later, and what do they find? Not only Christmas gifts, but that Santa Claus had decorated the living room.
Whoa.
I didn't know that interior decorating was part of Santa Claus's job. Santa Claus must have been watching a lot of Fixer Upper this year. Also, if Santa Claus is not only dropping off gifts, but also decorating your house, why don't more people believe in Santa Claus? What are these adults that are like, well, someone decorated my house? That's fine. We flash back to the North Pole headquarters, where all the elves are in their command center, and we learn from the head elf, Betty, that the Christmas list is very short this year.
Wait, is this the whole list?
Santa sees that the list is so short,
This is getting shorter every year. What's going on?
so he decides to make a stop at the very first house that he ever delivered presents to as Santa.
This is always one of my favorite stops.
Flashback time. It's a very sweet scene. He visits her, and it's the same girl as before, but now she's all older because it's been 28 years. And she doesn't believe in Santa Claus anymore.
Whoa, 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 whoa. You scared me. What? Stop. Come down. No, stop.
But Santa decides to pull off magic and give her a gift that she's always wanted, thus convincing her that he is Santa Claus.
It is you.
Which makes me wonder, why doesn't he do that more often? If you can just simply convince people that you're Santa by using your magic, what's with all this secrecy? Why not try to convince as many people as possible?
Heck is happening?
So Santa's magic just stops working all of a sudden, which is a scary thing. Like, I wouldn't want my magic to stop working. And I guess now would be as good of a time as any to introduce you to the worst character of the Santa Claus series, Noel. I think the actor's fine. The writers have decided to make him so unbelievably annoying. He's so needy, and he sometimes calls Santa Claus his best friend.
Best friend! Best friend!
Like, no one says that. No one says best friend.
They ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
So Santa returns, and everything's going well. He's trying to keep it secret that his magic failed because he doesn't want anyone to worry. But he tells Mrs. Claus,
And my magic failed.
Oh.
Noel already knows, and eventually the word starts getting out. And that is when we're introduced to the rest of the Santa Claus family. First, we meet Mrs. Claus. Now, throughout the entire series, Mrs. Claus basically doesn't like the fact that she's Mrs. Claus. She doesn't like how Mrs. Claus is always portrayed as an old woman. She also believes that people don't care about Mrs. Claus. Like, people don't even know Mrs. Claus's first name.
Because Mrs. Claus doesn't have a first name. I don't have a first name.
Then we meet Santa's two children, the older brother Cal and the younger sister Sandra. Now, Cal really likes virtual reality, and that's his whole personality.
What do we say about playing these games? You get all carried away and can't tell the difference between fantasy and reality. Yes, I'm real.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, VR. Sandra, on the other hand, really likes animals, and she always hangs out with the animals and feeds with them and takes them places. So much so that her parents are so concerned with her friendship with animals that they confront her.
This furry friends thing's getting out of hand.
And then she's like, there's literally no other children for me to hang out with. There are only 800-year-old elves around me. I don't have very much in common with 800-year-old elves, which is a good point.
Well, I'm giving you the worst news a Santa Claus can get.
Oh, no.
You've lost weight.
Santa does a doctor's visit, and we learn that a Santa can lose their magic if children stop believing in Santa Claus.
A loss of magic would be caused by all the children not believing in or needing Santa anymore.
Noel and the head elf Betty talk, and Betty is worried that Santa might have an accident and that the spirit of Christmas is fading away. And if the spirit of Christmas fades away, maybe the elves fade away too, because
Christmas is our purpose. If it goes away, I don't know, maybe we go away.
we jump through time to the next Christmas Eve, where Santa goes on his way to deliver presents once again.
I really do wish I could spend this time with you guys.
It's okay, Dad. We understand.
I understand wanting to be around your family during Christmas, but Santa literally works only one day of the year. There's 364 other days to spend time with your family. It's a great schedule that many fathers would probably kill for.
To all, a good night.
It wasn't a good night for Santa. Simon sees Santa Claus flying in his sleigh up above before disappearing.
Where'd he go?
There's no way that was real. But if it is, why can't we do the same?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's fine. Santa's magic isn't working super well, so there's a lot of turbulence on the sleigh, and then he tries to go into a house, but he starts going back and forth and... What was that scream? Noel is such a strange character, and Noel just salutes Santa like Santa died. What a goofy and dorky thing to do. And that is how the first episode ends. Santa falls off the roof, and he's probably dead. So the second episode starts back at the North Pole. The Elf Command Center is going completely insane because Santa Claus is down. Now, the elves don't know exactly why Santa Claus is down, but they don't know that he fell off the roof. They just know that something wrong happened. This causes Betty to open up a secret vault to grab a card for emergency circumstances that has all of the different clauses, which are from the previous movies, listed on it. It's hidden in a cupcake, which, I mean, that's obvious. You want to keep the card safe, so obviously you put it in a cupcake. This is common practice. Everyone knows this.
Cupcakes.
We go back, Santa Claus is still on the ground, and Noel, being good friends with Santa Claus, does CPR on him. He doesn't do CPR? He just yells at Santa's face? Okay. Well, he probably did it, right after Santa Claus fell off the roof and...
Because when my best friend's laying on the ground and unresponsive for 15 minutes, I yell.
Oh, he waited 15 minutes? Santa Claus was unresponsive for 15 minutes. That's like half of an episode of the Santa Clauses. What was he doing? Was he just hoping that Santa Claus would just wake up? Like, oh, he's just a little drowsy. He'll wake up any minute now. It's okay.
Did I rip my sack?
No, it's still up on the roof.
Oh, good.
Santa and Noel get back on the sleigh. Santa tells Noel, don't tell anyone. I don't want anyone to worry. So they go back to the North Pole, but Noel was so annoying.
What happened up there tonight?
Nothing but a cake. Everything was super duper. Peachy keen. Hunky dory. Easy as pie. Awful. Gangbusters. Dope. No. Not cracking.
Santa changed his mind and decided, you know what, maybe we should tell people that I fell off the roof.
Just tell her.
Betty and Santa have a meeting together where Betty shows Santa the card that was in the cupcake.
Cupcakes.
And on the card, it has all the different clauses from the past movies. But there's a fourth clause which allows Santa to retire if he feels like his purpose is done and that he can't do the job anymore. And that if he wants to retire, he has to pick a replacement.
So, me not being Santa anymore.
Santa discusses possibly retiring with Mrs. Claus, and Mrs. Claus thinks that he should retire because she's worried about his safety, and also because she hates being Mrs. Claus.
This is exactly how I'm perceived. Dumpy.
Have I mentioned that she hates being Mrs. Claus?
I know, you feel marginalized here as Mrs. Claus. I get that,
So Santa has a brilliant revelation. He realizes that he has children.
I have kids.
How hard did you hit your head?
And that one of those children is Charlie. Now, Charlie appears in the Santa Claus 1 and 2, and that Santa could pass down the Santa Claus job to his son Charlie. He could keep it in the family and could teach him how to be Santa Claus. And that Santa and Charlie could kind of both stay at the North Pole, and that he wouldn't have to leave the North Pole.
I already picked my replacement. Charlie.
We flash back to Simon, who is now giving a presentation before his investors in his business, Everything Now.
If you could have anything in the world, what would it be?
Customized home insurance from Liberty Mutual.
And as I said before, his business, Everything Now, is not doing very well.
Look, as a tech innovator and toy maker, you're a genius, which is why we invested in your company. But your management ineptitude is costing us greatly.
This man had his Airbnb out his yacht.
I've had to Airbnb my yacht.
You don't make a man Airbnb out his yacht. It could make his yacht smell like nachos.
It smells like nachos now.
No one wants that. How dare you, Simon? Simon's new plan is to deliver items with drones. What an original idea. Simon demonstrates and has a drone appear all of a sudden to deliver aspirin to the main investor, but it all goes horribly wrong.
No, go around. Detour, go around. Detour now!
I mean, in real life, this would kill everyone. Simon will be sued. Simon would lose everything. He's going to jail. I also don't know how these drones work. Simon starts yelling instructions at it. So is the drone voice activated or have voice controls? Which doesn't make a whole lot of sense if a drone's flying 300 feet in the air. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, Simon. Santa visits Charlie, who lives in Florida. He tells Charlie that he wants Charlie to be the new Santa Claus. But Charlie says that he doesn't want it. And Charlie also makes a weird jab at Santa's children.
Cal and Sandra okay?
Are they, though? You do know that I've spent time with them, right?
Yeah, those kids, they're crazy. Back at the North Pole, we see Mrs. Claus and Betty having some cider.
I'll miss our cider o'clock.
A cider o'clock, if you will. And Mrs. Claus asks Betty about the previous Mrs. Santas, but she won't say anything.
Santa is Santa. Always and forever, a continuum, not an individual. Thus, there are no past Santas, and the same for Mrs. Claus.
Very confusing and very abstract. Santa Claus walks in and says, hey, Charlie doesn't want the job anymore, so Santa has to figure out a new replacement. Betty does have a list of potential replacements in a big book. A funny detail in this scene is that when you see Betty flipping through the book, you see one of the candidates is Michael Bublé, which I think is a funny Easter egg. Simon Chosky's another candidate in the book. Definitely not foreshadowing. Definitely not. There is a scene with Noel and Betty talking to each other, and Betty shows Noel a snow globe that shows how much Christmas spirit there is in the world. And there's this weird, black hole situation in the globe, so obviously, Christmas spirit is doomed. Also, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but Noel and Betty are actually married. They are a married couple. I didn't even know elves could get married, much less Noel. We learn in another scene that Cal, while he is always in virtual reality, he is actually not playing a weird game or something, that Cal pretends to be in the real world in VR.
What is this?
Topeka, Kansas.
I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
I just finished mowing the lawn and now I'm going to the post office.
This makes Santa realize that his children need some normality and that things need to change. So he calls a family meeting, he sits down with his family, and Santa tells them that he is going to retire and they're going to move back to Chicago. The family in general takes it pretty well. Sandra is on the fence, Cal's all enthusiastic about moving back. Mrs. Claus, of course, is ready to not become Mrs. Claus anymore, and Noel is having a mental breakdown.
Is that tree crying?
No, why? Take me instead.
No, come on out. There we go.
I'll be fine. Just pretend that I'm not here.
If only. The next day, Santa goes before all the elves and announces that
I, Santa Claus, have decided to retire.
there is this funny moment where Santa talks about how, when he became Santa Claus, the elves weren't sad at all about the previous Santa Claus.
They didn't seem to care about the previous Santa disappearing. They didn't even shed a tear. And if they do that for me, it'd be like it didn't matter.
But when he announces his retirement, all the elves start crying and going crazy, which makes Santa very happy.
I matter, yes!
And now that Santa is officially retiring, Santa Claus and the elves have to find a new replacement to be the new Santa Claus. If you want a new Santa Claus, you obviously have to interview them, but how do you get people to come to the North Pole to be interviewed? And the answer is simple. You use drugs. That leads us to the home of Simon Chosky, where an elf suddenly appears, and Simon and his daughter are terrified.
To the safe room!
And then the elf smiles and giggles and then drugs them.
Marauders.
And that is how the episode ends.
Okay. How about this? Give us your best ho, ho, ho.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Ho, ho, homaha! Homaha!
So this episode starts with the Santa Clauses hacking up their things, ready to move out from the North Pole to Chicago. Mrs. Claus has a weird moment with Denim.
My James.
You want a moment alone with them?
She likes her denim way too much. But before they can leave, again, Santa has to pick a new replacement. And so far, he hasn't liked any of the candidates that have been brought to the North Pole. And by brought, I mean kidnapped. Noel is in the bedroom with Santa Claus, crying on his couch.
Just hanging out with my best friend until Santa leaves me forever.
We then see Simon Chosky and his daughter Grace wake up at the North Pole. Simon is obviously very nervous and anxious about waking up in a new place after being kidnapped and drugged.
We've just been abducted by very bad people.
Bad people don't sell cookies.
Don't eat that! It might have poison or...
But then Grace makes Simon taste the cookies.
This is the best thing that I've ever tasted in my life.
Which doesn't negate the fact that they could be poisoned. I mean, is there some rule where if things taste good, they can't be poisoned? Simon and Grace leave their bedroom. They meet some of the elves and the Santa Claus family. And while Simon goes to take his interview with Santa, Cal shows Grace around the North Pole workshop. But while Cal is doing this, Sandra sees Cal with Grace.
I know this place better than you do.
For some reason, gets kind of offended and defensive that she isn't the one who's showing Grace around. Sandra ends up taking Grace and showing her around without Cal knowing. Cal's like, oh no, I was supposed to watch over Grace. We see Simon in his interview with Santa, and it's not going very well.
Sorry. That's all right. They're just priceless.
And right when Santa says that he could leave, Cal rushes in and announces that...
Yeah, I sort of lost his daughter.
Grace? Oh, I gotta find her.
This causes Santa to go over to the elves' police and security, but when Santa and Simon go there, they find out that there's only one person left in the department, because...
We get paid in fudge. After 20 years of no crime in the North Pole, Betty decided extra fudge would be better spent on the line workers.
Now, defund the police has even struck the North Pole. We see Sandra showing Grace the reindeer, and then all of a sudden, Sandra hears one of the reindeer honk.
You are my best friend.
What?
Which has never happened to her before, and that makes her uneasy, and she decides she needs to go talk to someone about this. The person is in the woods, and she ends up taking Grace with her. Santa and Simon learn that Sandra and Grace were last seen in the Wobbly Woods, so they go out to the Wobbly Woods to find their children. But in the Wobbly Woods, there is La Befana.
I thought the sticky snow had caught two hens.
Christmas witch.
You know, I don't like this word witch.
I'm La Befana.
Befana is basically the Italian version of Santa Claus. She is actually not a witch or anything. She's just an old woman who's very good at house cleaning, the legend goes, which I found kind of funny. Hence why she has a broom. Sandra and Grace were at Befana's house, so Befana takes Santa and Simon there. They meet up with their kids, and that's where we see Santa and Sandra have a talk over some of their disagreements because Sandra doesn't want to leave the North Pole, and she's angry that Santa has made a list of all the things he wants to do after he leaves the North Pole. Santa and Sandra talk over their emotions and their issues, and they have a very good, sweet moment. And they also talk about boats.
Yeah, it just says, buy a boat, and then there's a bunch of doodles of boats. And then it says, do I really want a boat? And then there's doodles of boats with X's through them. That's super sad, Dad.
Do you know what I was thinking?
That you could just lease a boat with an option to buy?
It's actually a good idea.
Boat talk! And now after all of this, Santa, I guess, offers Simon the job to be Santa Claus, which I think is kind of strange. He didn't really do that much to show that he would be a competent Santa Claus, except that you lost his daughter. Next, we see that Simon and Grace talking on a couch, discussing whether he wants to be Santa. And Grace wants Simon to take the job, so he decides that he accepts the new job of Santa Claus.
Dad.
Okay, I mean, I'll take the job.
So everyone else was just standing there listening the whole time. Oh, that's kind of awkward.
You become custodian of Christmas.
Santa and the family are about to leave to Chicago, and Santa will go through the desantification process.
The desantification process has begun!
And Santa will no longer be Santa anymore, but will be Scott in the real world. Noel tries to give a farewell goodbye performance of the song Last Christmas, but fails horribly because, of course...
The fairy. Oh, I'm sorry, Santa.
And then, boom, they are transported back to Chicago, and Scott Calvin wakes up with Mrs. Claus, who's now Carol. Sandra and Cal rush into the parents' room after they wake up, and they are terrified when they see their father.
Who are you?
I warned you, this is what I look like here.
No longer looks like Santa Claus, but looks like
A guy named Ron?
Ron?
No.
Are you okay? Is the real world killing you?
That is where the episode ends. So we are at the halfway point, so if you want to relax and take oh, look, it's Santa Claus. Do you have anything to say to the audience?
Hello, I'm Santa. You better subscribe to the Thinking Hound YouTube channel. If you don't subscribe, I will have to destroy everything that you love.
Okay, that's enough of that. Let's get back to the show.
Go! I just pulled my arm out.
Santa!
I'm not the man I used to be.
You're not a man. You're my hero.
We start this episode with Grace waking up Simon in his bedroom. He is now the new Santa. He's all excited, but then...
Where's the Santa coat?
Simon cannot find the Santa coat, which is a big deal. Back in Chicago, Scott is being creepy in the coffee shop.
Lucas, I knew you were going to like that. He's got those PJs with the Buzz Lightyear on them that I thought was so...
And is also the worst Starbucks customer.
You know, I have a Frappuccino, a double one, and put some chocolate in there, mostly chocolate. No coffee, just hot chocolate. Put cocoa in it instead of coffee.
Heavy cream if you got that, ooh, and then put a little peppermint in there if you have that, any kind of hard candy, throw it in there, and then whipped cream, chop up some cookies if you have any one of these, and sprinkles.
Scott just is not transitioning very well to living in the normal world. Back at the North Pole, Simon is giving his first speech as the new Santa to all of the elves, and Simon says a lot of stereotypical corporate phrases.
The corporate synergy here, by the way, is fire.
I can feel the heat.
And admits to Betty that he has lost the coat.
I may have sort of misplaced the coat.
You what?
Which has never happened before, and the coat cannot be replaced because it is the same coat that has been used by all of the Santas before and was made from the robe of St. Nicholas. In Chicago, Scott and Carol have to enroll Cal and Sandra into school, and they enroll them in the same school where Carol used to be a school principal. And on their first school day, Cal is super excited about seeing, basically, people, and accidentally bumps into Riley, his future love interest. What a unique concept.
Are you all right?
Yeah, I'm fine. I just got cut from the softball team.
Oh.
I think Cal was asking if you were physically fine after being bumped into, not about your performance in an extracurricular activity, but, Sandra, on the other hand, shoved a bunch of animals into her coat. Why did she do that? I don't know. The staff at the school are excited to see Carol again and kind of ignore Scott, who feels dejected.
You remember my husband? Not ringing a bell.
At the North Pole, one of the elves believes in science.
Hugh is one of those elves that believes in science.
And explains that with magic and science, Simon could deliver presents not only during Christmas time, but any time of the year. The days go by, and suddenly it's Memorial Day. The Calvin family all goes to a Memorial Day picnic event where Cal meets Riley again. And they start chatting it up, and Cal definitely gives off a good second impression.
Well, my full name is Buddy Calvin Claus, but you know how many elves are named Buddy? It gets confusing, you know?
Elves?
Kids.
But don't worry, Riley is not creeped out by Cal talking about elves, and they will soon start dating. Sandra, on the other hand, isn't making any new human friends. But then, all of a sudden, a runaway horse dashes through the picnic, and Sandra chases down the horse and jumps on the horse, halting the horse before it hurts anyone or hurts itself. The other horse riders are impressed by Sandra's abilities and ask if she wants to join the Horse Girls Club, which she accepts. While this was all happening, Carol gets offered a new school supervisor role, and Scott feels more and more ignored, not knowing what to do.
Of course I'm going to be okay. I've had my time in the spotlight. It's your turn to shine now, and I'll sit in the dark.
Everyone else in his family is kind of getting used to living normal life, but Scott isn't. He doesn't know what to do now that he is not Santa Claus. Back at the North Pole, Simon asks for a sacrifice.
My beautiful, forever young elves. Who wants to give me some of your blood? I'm just kidding. Come on. I'm kidding.
Okay, sure, yeah. I wish the North Pole had an HR department. Simon announces his new plan to have Christmas every day.
What if I told you that we could make Christmas every day?
Some of the elves, including Betty and Noel, believed the new plan would destroy the spirit of Christmas and thus Christmas magic. But it seems like the majority of elves are stupid and go along with Simon's plan. Betty is unable to convince Simon to change his mind about having Christmas every single day, and Noel decides to leave the North Pole and go find Scott and convince Scott to return to the North Pole to fix all of these problems. Noel arrives at Scott's house, but Scott tells Noel,
Simon deserves the right to be the Santa of his choosing, right? Just like I deserve the right to be the dad I was meant to be.
However, Scott does tell Noel that he can stay and help Scott with his new job. Yes, Scott got a new job working for Everything Now, Simon's own company, which is delivering all of the presents for his Christmas Everyday plan. At the North Pole, Betty tells Simon that some elves have gone missing and that the reindeer don't feel like flying. Simon feels that the elves are deserting him, but Betty suspects that the decrease in Christmas spirit has something to do with it. Back in Chicago, Scott gets fired for getting into a snowball fight with some kids, and this makes Scott even more depressed. Scott feels that the only reason he became Santa in the first place was because of luck.
It was just a fluke that I'm even Santa Claus. That guy could have slid off anybody's roof. I'd just go one clause to another, you know? I'm out of clauses now.
Back at the North Pole, Betty shows Simon the Christmas spirit orb and tells him that Christmas spirit is decreasing, which causes some of the other elves to start complaining very loudly towards Simon.
New Santa is destroying Christmas spirit.
And then they suddenly disappeared before their eyes. The lack of Christmas spirit is causing the elves to disappear, but this doesn't concern Simon that much. He just continues with his plan of having Christmas every day.
You're fired.
Betty, after this confrontation, goes into the wobbly woods and finds that the Santa coat has been at Bafana's house this entire time.
It came here on its own.
It did?
I guess the Santa coat is not inanimate. Back in Chicago, Scott decides that he will be Santa Claus for his family.
I should do what I do best. And what I do best is Santa Claus.
And he wants to finally decorate and spend Christmas with his family. But then, all of a sudden, his family freezes in time. And then...
Hey, how about a little marshmallow?
Oh, no.
Oh, puh.
So it's Bernard. Bernard was the head elf in the Santa Claus 1 and 2. And the actor was not, the elf wasn't available for the third movie. Bernard apparently left the North Pole and is married to a human now, which has caused Bernard to age and become mortal, just like a normal marriage. It's kind of cool to see Bernard back, and he's returned to convince Scott.
I know, Simon is ruining Christmas.
So if you know that, why aren't you at the North Pole kicking some Santa butt?
Because it's not my job. It was an accident anyway, you know? Somebody slid off the roof and boom, there I was.
Of course you'd think that.
Scott goes all boo-hoo over Bernard, and Bernard decides to go time traveling, universe hopping. I'm not sure which, maybe both? Does it even really matter at this point? Every single movie franchise is all time travel and multi-universe timelines, yada yada. And why can't we just stay in one time and in my universe? Bernard and Scott jump in time to the Great Depression and meet Santa Claus number 17.
It wasn't easy, but we made do. We handed out oranges and socks.
I didn't know the magical workshop at the North Pole was impacted by the world economy so much. Santa 17 and Bernard show a memory of when Scott was a boy and actually met Santa 17.
But one day, I think that you are going to make this world a much better place.
Go to this weird place, and Scott meets St. Nicholas, and this is where we learn the lore about Santa Claus, I guess.
His undertaking injected true magic into the world. And from that magic emanated the world of claws and elves, ethereal beings who carried on the mission.
Ethereal? I wondered about that. Am I ethereal?
Nope. You are a regular human man with many, many faults.
And this is when we learn that Scott was the first human Santa Claus. That all of the Santa Clauses before were all magical.
I'm here because of an accident. I saw you slip off the roof. You fell.
You think someone yelling really made me slip and fall?
But that Santa Claus 17 thought that technology was way too difficult of a problem for him to overcome, so that a human needed to be Santa Claus, and he picked Scott because of that single encounter he had when he was 8. I don't know why. After learning all of this, Scott is more motivated to save Christmas, so he returns back home and tells his family about how he went through the Yuleverse and learned important lessons on his misadventures. Apparently, they were the first human family of the North Pole, and Sandra and Cal may have magical powers. Why? I don't know.
So what you're saying is that we were the first human family at the North Pole. That we were specifically chosen for this time. Well, that changes everything. We have to go back.
Because elves are disappearing and Christmas magic is decreasing at critical levels, Scott and the family want to return to the North Pole to save Christmas, but Scott thinks that it's too dangerous for his family, so he and Noel secretly transport to the North Pole by using the Christmas spirit snow globe orb. So it transports people now. Good to know, now that we are in episode 5. The rest of the family wants to go to the North Pole, so they must utilize the superpowers of Sandra and Cal to get to the North Pole. Sandra can communicate to animals and talk with animals, apparently that's her superpower, and Cal can see holes in the sky. That's his superpower.
All the drones are coming from there.
This is when we finally learn what Simon's Christmas Everyday plan actually looks like. So Simon is using Santa magic to magically teleport drones near people's houses, which then deliver items that they buy from Everyday Now, his company. It's almost as fast as Amazon Prime. So the family's plan to get to the North Pole is for Sandra to convince a horse that it can fly, and that Cal can direct the horse into the hole portals in the sky, and that they would be transported to the North Pole. Does the plan work? Do you really need me to answer that? The answer is yes, by the way, because, of course. At the North Pole, Scott gets quickly captured by the security drones, and is put in jail by Simon. And that is basically where the episode ends.
What are you in for?
Just like how I feel that you're not bad drones, you're just programmed that way.
Do not try to distract us with tender feelings.
Sorry you feel this way. You were built to deliver joy to this world. It must be difficult. No drone.
We're finally at the last episode. We see Grace walking around the North Pole, singing to herself, but she's all alone because all the elves have disappeared. Even Betty has disappeared at this point. We see that the Santa coat, which was at Befana's house, has disappeared again.
It's a sneaky, sneaky, sneaky coat.
In the North Pole jail, after seeing that Simon's appearance has not changed to look more Santa-y, Scott learns that Simon has not put the Santa coat on, which means that the Santification process has not begun, so Simon isn't Santa officially.
He's not officially Santa without the coat on. So we just find that coat, we can change all of this.
But one of the drones overhears this and tells Simon about how important the Santa coat is. So now Simon is trying to find the Santa coat.
Thank you, EN52. You've been most helpful.
I'm EN51.
I'm so confused by these drones. They seem to develop new and better technology every single minute in this episode. So apparently they can communicate and listen. Scott's family stays hidden and tries to find Scott. And they do find Scott in prison and break him out. Then they all split up to find the Santa coat because that's what they need to do next. They need to find it before Simon, but Simon, on the other hand, is also searching for the Santa coat, and Simon's drones are also searching for the Santa coat. Everyone's searching around and doing their own thing, and wouldn't you know it, the Santa coat is in the middle of a hallway, and both Scott and Simon see the Santa coat at the exact same time. They have a little standoff, but they both run towards the coat. Simon grabs the coat first, and then threatens to burn it.
You need this dusty old coat so that you can become Santa and drive me out of business, huh?
No, don't do that.
Why does he threaten to burn the Santa coat and not just put on the Santa coat? That's kind of out of left field. Does he not like how the Santa coat looks? When Simon is doing his villainous monologue,
I think you're worried that when people hear Christmas, they're gonna remember my name.
Grace overhears him.
Are you the bad guy?
Then Grace basically guilt trips Simon and says that her Christmas wish is to have Christmas with her father. This makes Simon realize how bad of a person he has become and decides not to burn the coat and lets Scott have it. However, even after getting the coat, they all see that the Christmas spirit in the Christmas spirit orb is all gone. So I guess that they were too late.
I'm too late. It's the best we could do. The best we could. We tried.
Whoa, something wild is happening.
Wait, what? A little group hug between like 8 people brings back all the Christmas spirit in the world and manifests all the elves to return? I didn't realize it was that easy. I was expecting it to be a lot more difficult than that. All of the elves return. Noel and Betty have this weird moment where they reveal all of their pet names of each other, which is super awkward.
Sweet pea, caramel cone, pudding pie, gumdrop, jelly bean, snickerdoodle, sugar pie, honey bunch.
Scott and his family decide they will stay at the North Pole. Scott puts on the Santa coat and he transforms back into Santa Claus. It's Christmas Eve, so there's not much time left to deliver presents. But Santa decides to take his family with him to deliver presents. That way he can spend more time with them and also mentor Cal into becoming the new Santa Claus. And they live happily ever after. Whew! That took way longer than I thought it would. So what are my final thoughts on the Santa Claus's original Disney Plus show? Did it dishonor the Santa Claus franchise? I don't think it did. I actually liked a lot of what the show did. I thought the writing was great. I think that most of the characters are fun, except Noel. Scott felt the same as all the other movies, and I think the rest of the Santa Claus family were excellent characters. As a villain, I think Simon was fine. I felt that they did not really explain what his motivation was. He just kind of became evil just to become more successful, I guess. But he wasn't bad. But I think that the biggest issue with the series was the whole multiverse time-traveling ordeal. I appreciate the attempt by the series to fix plot holes from the previous movies, but I left with even more questions. I don't think they needed to explain the magic or history of Santa Claus, at least not in the way that they did. I think it's becoming kind of cliche to have a multiverse and time travel, and I think it made it more complicated than it needed to be. There's a lot of like weird, quirky spots in the movie, but in all honesty, I think the Santa Claus's TV show was better than the Santa Claus 2 and 3. The original still holds a special place in my heart, but after watching the show probably 6 or 7 times, I'm ready to be done with it and never have to worry about the Santa Claus series ever again. Wait, what's this? A new tweet? They just announced a season 2?